So I'm going to be presenting on a strand that a theme that came up in my research for my dissertation. So similar to Tracy in that sense. During the COVID-19 lockdowns, along with many families around the world, my children and I participated in emergency schooling and the accompanying and euphemistically named online pivot. I found myself rigidly complying with daily learning platform push notifications, and the impact on the family was significant. It was this and the experiences of others in my community that led me to question how the parent-child relationship is being reshaped by platformised data collection practices in primary education in England and what the implications might be. So moving on to the context, we know that the widespread shift to digital forms of information collection is reconfiguring social relations. The imperative to extract data has combined powerfully with what Ball and Grimaldi termed the neoliberalisation of education. This emphasis on marketisation and competition has intensified a culture of standardisation and evidence-based practice in English state primary schools. The combination of neoliberalism and digitalisation has produced what Lindsay Grant has termed a data culture. And this is exacerbated through practices of data valence, which Selwyn defines as data processing that allows for the identification, classification, and representation of social entities in the form of automated data profiles. So a significant catalyst in the reshaping of educational practices then is the digital platform, which is a networked infrastructure designed to organise interactions between users. The prevalence and flexibility of platforms position them as political technologies and mechanisms of power that modify societal structures, and this is a process termed platformisation. So what did the literature say? Well, because schools conform to this governance of numbers, the impact of the digital on teachers is substantial. Hierarchised surveillance, data embodiment, self-doubt, techno-stress, these all exemplify some of the tensions staff endure in the platformised educational landscape. But there are emerging examples of resistance by teachers asserting their pedagogical practice outside current educational policy, which Morris describes as ethical subversion or a responsive form of care attuned to the needs of children, dovetails a little bit with what Sarah Graham had in her theme of subversive design. In Alban Clark's research, for example, when recording observations, practitioners omitted the language centred on developmental milestones, instead foregrounding children's play-based social experiences and sense of community belonging. When we're thinking about reshaping the child, Selwyn's research on 2 Australian secondary schools was interesting, and it showed how teachers are prone to mirror their own accountability regimes when processing pupil data. Alice Bradbury notes how the early years curriculum in England induces a data double that oversimplifies a child's complexity and facilitates what she calls a schoolification or formalisation in early childhood provision that reduces free play, narrows the curriculum, and normalises grouping by ability. Even student discipline has become subject to data valence, with platforms like Class Dojo promoting a reductive behaviour shaping function, which encroaches into the home, as Manilov, Sullivan and Slee's 2019 research identifies. For parents, technologies combine with social, cultural and political discourses to reconceptualise child rearing, particularly the processes involved in what Wilson describes as attaining the ideal child. Parental anxieties are exploited, leaving children vulnerable to commodification, which political scientist Joan Tronto calls smothering care, as opposed to care that leads to autonomy. Children are therefore subjected to well-intentioned practices of intimate surveillance, which is a care-driven form of monitoring through close personal relationships, or sharenting, where parents share personal information about their children in social media. Notably, Clark's 2013 research explores how parental responses to technology differ on socioeconomic lines. Clark found that lower-income families largely encourage what she terms an ethic of respectful connectedness, and this emphasises family-focused media. In contrast, middle-class parents favour media use for educational and personal development, or, she calls it, an ethic of expressive empowerment. So the research gap then was how the convergence of home technology and school impacts families. I wanted to understand the extent of parental awareness of data gathering practices in schools, how teachers use this data for decision making, and the vision of specific educational platforms, which in this study were Seesaw and Class Dojo. The study had its theoretical roots in Gilles Deleuze's concept of controlled societies, which builds on Foucault's disciplinary societies, but shifts the discussion towards new systems of control, levered through computers and their technologies.
Talia,
Deleuzian theory.
just to say, you've got 5 minutes left.
Thank you. Deleuzian theory provided a useful lens to explore how platforms disrupt relationships between children, parents, and teachers through the continuous production of new data assemblages or individuals. So as you can see, I used a comparative case study methodology in the qualitative tradition. I've used pseudonyms to refer to each school to preserve their anonymity. The fieldwork unfolded in 3 phases that consisted of semi-structured interviews with school business managers, parents and teachers, and documentary methods, specifically Light, Burgess and Duguay's environment of expected use methodology, to scrutinise the vision, operating model and governance of learning platform Seesaw. And this mapping depicts the platforms that explicitly interlinked pupils, parents and teachers at both research sites. At Adlingworth, which was a socioeconomically advantaged school, Seesaw was adopted as the main intermediary between home and school during the pandemic and used routinely thereafter. The socioeconomically disadvantaged school, Bollingwood, used a mosaic of platforms steered by teacher input, but interviewees at the second site were also familiar with Seesaw from other settings. So what did I find? Across all groups of participants in both schools, the most prominent point was that care-driven practices altered the parent-child relationship in response to platformised learning. At Adlingworth, most parents undertook a professionalised role in order to optimise their children's development. The study revealed how technologies are complicit in positioning the child as a focus of concern and instrumentalising the parent role by fostering what Wilson calls an active citizenship ethic aimed at maximising children's potential. In contrast, parents at Bollingwood used platforms to connect with their children and conform to aspects of surveillance through Clarke's ethic of respectful connectedness. But they did have concerns too. Most parents across both settings saw platforms supporting their children's learning, but many expressed misgivings over their pedagogical value, ethics, and effects on their children's well-being. Nevertheless, in response to questions aimed at establishing parental awareness of data gathering in schools, 9 of the 11 interviewees stated work distractions, a lack of curiosity, and the tedium of digital form filling as contributing factors to an obliviousness regarding the platform gaze. And also widespread parental assumptions that regulation and staff expertise provide the necessary framework to protect data rights supported Nottingham, Stockman and Burke's research that children and parents lack awareness of less obtrusive hazards, including data mining, commercial exploitation, and progressively entrenched digital dependency. The most interesting part was how school staff viewed platforms. Platforms reshaped perceptions of professionalised care. Teachers at both sites valued learning platforms because they facilitated caregiving through flexible messaging, inclusivity, and increased parental engagement with the learning process. One teacher at Bollingwood used read receipts to create a robust overview of hard-to-reach groups, such as English as an additional language families, in response to previous parents' failure to access their children's digital profiles. She recounted her failure to engage with Class Dojo in this case felt soul-destroying, both for her pupils but significantly her own sense of professionalism. Teachers at Adlingworth, who routinely use Seesaw read receipts, discussed similar frustrations, revealing how platforms increase visibility and intensify performativity by demanding parental responsiveness. Seesaw overtly urges schools to create a culture of participation beyond the classroom within a master narrative of elevated learning outcomes. This positions teachers as accountable for family involvement and reinforces assumptions of good parenting as one who accesses expertise. I would argue then, Yep.
Just to say you've got 1 minute.
Thank you. I've argued then that teachers view data valence as a form of care receiving as well as caregiving. Teachers at Adlingworth also detailed how Seesaw had occasioned a competitive performativity in some parents who perceived their children as sidelined in uploaded images, prompting a withdrawal of communication, which I've argued is reciprocal care in protest. Parent 5 at Bollingwood reiterated this, citing inconsistent posting of her daughter's class activities on the school Facebook site compared to other year groups as reflective of staff deficiencies. So it looks like platforms do connect and divide us. They demonstrate, as Selwyn has noted, data's capacity to define, describe, and constitute social life by disrupting and reshaping organisational culture and the interrelationships that reside within our schools. So in sum, they do reconfigure the parent-child relationship by making everything very hyper-visible. They reshape interrelationships between parents, children, and teachers. They intensify the pedagogical figure of parents amongst affluent communities. They conflate care with accountability and position parental responsiveness as care receiving as well as caregiving. And importantly to note, parents lack awareness of more insidious harms, and teachers are oblivious to the extent of their own liability and also how they shape the idea of good parenting. Thanks.